winter, I got in the habit of hanging out at my local library. I was having problems with the heat at my apartment, and the library was always warm and cozy. As long as I went at the right time of day, there would rarely be many people there, just how I liked it. I'd do a little work on my computer, play some games, and yes, sometimes even read. One time I was there on a gloomy Sunday afternoon. You know those winter days where the sky is just a wall of solid gray and there's a bitter chill in the air. Though I was dreading going back to my frigid apartment, it was starting to get late. I decided to pack up my stuff and head home. My apartment was just a few blocks from the library, a 10-minute walk. As I left through the front doors, I noticed a guy sitting on the wall next to the sidewalk. He was skinny and about the same age as me. Mid-20s. He was dressed normally, though I did notice that he didn't have a coat on. I didn't have one on either, but I was only walking a few blocks. I wondered how long he had been outside. As I walked by him, I heard him say something about not being able to get a car. He was on his phone, and it looked like he was trying to order a lift or something. I asked him where he was going. He looked at me for a second, then told me he was trying to get to his friend's house, where he'd left his wallet. The house was in the next town over, a 20-minute drive. Now, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure why I stopped to talk to this guy. He looked pretty non-threatening, and seeing him shivering there in the cold, maybe I was a bit sympathetic after dealing with all the problems at my apartment. I offered to give him a ride. It would be a quick drive, and it would keep me out of my freezer of an apartment for a little while longer. Yes, I'd heard the stories about picking up a hitchhiker. But this guy looked pretty normal, and seemed like he just needed a hand. If I had been in the same position, I hope someone would have helped me out. Anyhow, I told him to wait and that I'd be back in a few minutes with my car. "Hold on," he said. "How do I know you're coming back?" Well, I'm offering to give you a ride," I said. "Look," he replied, I don't really want to wait unless I know you're actually coming back." I found his attitude kind of weird, but at this point I had already offered the ride. Okay, I said, "my car's this way, right over here." The guy, we'll call him Danny, followed me to my car and we set off. I started heading in the direction of the next town over, and he pulled up the address of his destination. But when I entered it into Google Maps, I saw that it wasn't exactly where he said it was. It was near the next town over, but actually a few miles past it, in a much more rural-looking area. Danny hadn't exactly lied to me, but he had definitely stretched the truth. The extra time didn't really concern me. It was only a few minutes, but I was a little wary of heading to this more remote location, as it would be getting dark soon. The ride was rather unremarkable. We had a few awkward exchanges, but overall Danny seemed as normal as I'd hoped. We got to the neighboring town and drove a few miles beyond it. The roads were becoming more and more desolate. It was a heavily wooded area with only the occasional home off the side of the road. Just as the winter sun dipped behind the tree line, we arrived at his destination. I slowed to a stop. To our right was a long dirt path leading to a derelict old farmhouse. Now, I am not exaggerating when I say that this house looked like something out of a horror movie. Peeling paint, crooked shutters. There was even one of those steel oil drum fire pits in the front yard, complete with crackling flames lapping at the cold night air. Dark smoke billowed from the glowing drum, spreading an eerie fog across the scene. "This is where you're going?" I asked Danny. He didn't answer right away. He was looking around, glancing over his shoulder. I was starting to feel a bit uneasy. "Is this the place where you left your wallet?" "I think so," he replied. "Hey, what do you mean you think so?" I asked. "Well, I've never actually been here before," he answered. I was going to ask him how he could have left his wallet somewhere he'd never been when he opened the car door and got out. "I'm going to go look for them." Danny said as he closed the door and headed towards the house. Still confused, I watched as he walked right up to the front porch and rang the doorbell. He waited for a moment before walking around to the other side of the house and disappearing in the darkness. Had he been lying to me from the beginning? He'd never been here before. He didn't lose his wallet? It was all getting too creepy. It was time to go. I started to pull away, but found myself torn. Maybe he just had the wrong address. Could I really just drive off and leave him stranded in the middle of nowhere? As creepy as this all was, I felt strangely responsible for Danny's fate. If I disappeared and something happened to him at this sketchy old house, wouldn't that be my fault? And so I decided to wait. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Shit, I thought. Maybe something had happened to him. I crept up the walk, past the flaming steel drum, and up to the dilapidated front porch. I knocked on the door and heard movement inside. Loud, slow steps on bare wood. A series of clicks from the other side of the door. Whoever it was must have had at least 4 separate locks. The door creaked open to reveal a man, at least 80 years old. Even though his eyes were sunken deep into wrinkled sockets, I could tell he was confused at the sight of me.
"Hello? Who are you?"
His voice sounded like an echo in an ancient cave. I'm sorry," I said. I just dropped someone off here. Have you seen him?" I described Danny's physical appearance, the clothes he had on, everything. The man just looked at me. He seemed to understand what I was saying, but he had absolutely no idea who I was talking about. With a smile, he told me that he'd been home all evening. I noticed that half of his teeth were missing, and the other half looked about ready to fall out. Having reached a dead end, I decided to leave. I had waited for Danny. I'd asked the man in the house if he'd seen him. There was nothing else I could do. Eager to leave the creepy old man and his crumbling farmhouse, I got back in my car and drove all the way home. That night I wrapped myself up in layers and layers of blankets, fighting the usual chill of winter air in my bedroom, but also a different kind of chill. A chill that sent shivers up my spine when I pictured that ancient man with his rotting smile and Danny disappearing into the darkness. A few days went by. I started to forget about Danny, the old man, the spooky farmhouse. It seemed like nothing would ever come of any of it. I went back to the library, half worried I'd see Danny sitting outside, but nothing. I hung out for a while as usual, then headed back to my place. I had frozen pizza for dinner, and then fell asleep early. Ring, ring, ring. Huh? What? I sat up in bed. Had I been dreaming, or had I heard ring, ring, ring? My doorbell. Someone was at my door. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. Who the hell was at my door at 3 in the morning? I ventured downstairs. I live on the second floor of a duplex, and looked through the curtain on my front door. It was Danny. "Hey, let me in, man. Let me use your phone. Mine is out of battery." He shouted through the glass, loud enough to wake up my downstairs neighbors, and my next door neighbors too. "What? It's 3 in the morning, no," I replied. "Well, at least let me come in and charge mine then," he yelled back. "No," I insisted. "You owe me. You left me stranded out there. I told you to wait, and you left me." I could hear the anger bubbling in his voice. What exactly had happened out at the house? How did he know where I lived? I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't about to let him into my place. "Keep ringing the bell, and I'm gonna call the cops." I did my best to sound intimidating. I ran back up the stairs and locked myself in my bedroom. The doorbell continued, now punctuated by the pounding of his fists. I regretted ever running into him at the library, offering him a ride, walking to my car. Shit, that was it. That's how he knew where I lived. He'd been so weirdly insistent about not waiting for me at the library. By letting him walk with me to my car, I'd inadvertently shown him my building as well. Stupid. As he continued to pound on the door, I realized I'd have to follow through on my threat to call the cops. He was only getting louder and angrier, effectively calling my bluff. I grabbed my cell and dialed 911. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for them to arrive. Danny sounded close to breaking my door down when they finally showed and escorted him off the premises. I never saw him again, and just a few weeks later, I moved into a new apartment, one with working heat. See, good deeds are overrated. I know we're not supposed to live in fear, but when dealing with hitchhikers, I think a little fear goes a long way. Anyway, good night, fellow ghouls. Maybe double check the locks on your door before going to sleep. See you again sometime soon, I hope.